Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody to this workshop. Thank you for joining me. My name is Rand Brenner, and this workshop is licensing strategies to survive and thrive in a down economy. I put this together because obviously we're facing some unique times, some challenging times, and some things have to be figured out going forward. And that's one of the reasons why this workshop, I think you'll find informative, insightful, and hopefully is going to give you some ideas and ways that you can move forward. And we'll be moving into, obviously, a new environment. We don't know what that's going to look like yet, but there are going to be opportunities for entrepreneurs, startups, businesses, people with ideas and innovations. There's going to be a lot of challenges and problems to solve. And so with that, let's jump into this presentation. And so let's begin with what we're going to cover today. And that is going to be a quick introduction. For those of you that don't know me, I'll give you a quick introduction about who I am and my business. Then we'll take a look at the history of intellectual property, because I think it's important to understand that IP actually has a very long history and has been integral in a lot of the economic evolution of global economies around the world, and in fact has been a big part of rebuilding and restarting economies. So we'll look at innovation and how that impacts the economy. I'm going to talk about intellectual property as it relates to businesses and what's inside businesses and why it's so important to businesses. And I'm sure many of you have intellectual property. Many of you may be thinking, do I have intellectual property? Hopefully, in the course of this presentation, I'm going to help you discover that. And then we'll jump into licensing strategies for a challenging economy. There's many ways to use licensing and intellectual property. I'm going to take you through quite a few of those strategies today. This is really going to be a bird's eye view of these. Many of these strategies we can dive deeper into, and I'm happy to do so at a future point, but I really wanted to give you an opportunity to understand the dynamics of intellectual property and licensing and how they apply to the challenges we have going forward and how you can use it to really take advantage of that. And then, of course, summarizing, and we'll get into a question and answers. There's a chat box there. If you do have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box. I'll answer them as we go if possible, and if not, then I'll certainly address them at the conclusion of this presentation. So let me start with history, just a little bit about how I got into this business. I got my start in the entertainment world in licensing at a time when the entertainment business did not consider licensing really a mainstay business. I joined Warner Brothers at the time they were producing the first Batman movie, for those of you who may remember it way back when. But at that point in time, licensing was not a mainstay business for the studios. It was considered something off to the side. Their main business was in making and distributing movies through movie theaters, syndication, things like that. And in developing the licensing program there at that time, you could have gotten a Batman license for literally next to nothing, because really they were looking at licensing as a way to try to make money on a movie property that they did not think was going to make any money, because nobody had seen Batman for over 30 years. Fast forward, long story short, when the movie came out, it went like a bat out of hell, as I like to say. And suddenly the studios woke up to the value of licensing. Now, as you move forward, you see that licensing and merchandise is a big component of entertainment, makes up a third to a half of a lot of the entertainment studios. Many of the movies and TV shows today really are drivers for that merchandise part of it. And in addition to Warner Brothers, I also spent time at Saban Entertainment, ran the North American licensing division for Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, another one of those big kids properties that took off and generated hundreds of millions of dollars in retail sales. And after doing that, I set up my own company and got looking at doing licensing independently for businesses, and quickly discovered that licensing and intellectual property was not something that a lot of people were familiar with, a lot of businesses were familiar with. And so what I offer are primarily three services. A lot of it is around the licensing, managing the entire licensing process from strategy and planning all the way through the outreach, negotiations, and monitoring those contracts and maintaining those relationships. Also do consulting work on the strategy side, looking at the IP. How can we do it? Do we have IP? What are some of the issues companies face? Things like that. And then a third part is the IP audit, something a lot of businesses don't do, but they should do, because what's inside your business is intellectual property. Intellectual property is an asset, which I'm going to be talking more about. And it's an asset that in many cases is never, you don't have an inventory of it. You don't really know what you have. And as I go through these strategies today, I'm going to be talking about IP and an audit and why it's important that you do one, especially today, especially as we're going forward, because really through that inventory of what you have in IP, it's going to enable you to figure out which of these strategies to use and how to use them. Because if you don't know what you have, you can't put it to work. So I work with all types of IP, medical device, healthcare, orthopedic devices, rehab, consumer products, trade secrets, know-how, formulations. It really runs the gamut. I do a lot of work with medical device and med tech, because here in the Orange County area where I'm located happens to be a hotbed for it. But really intellectual property is global. So in working with intellectual property, my clients really come from all over and in all types of industries, and working with them to help move that intellectual property into the market. So one of the things to understand is, obviously we're going through a challenging time. We're waiting to get the economy reopened. We don't know what the economy will look like. Obviously unemployment is rising. There's talk of recession. There's talk of depression. Important thing to understand is that we're going through an evolution in the economy. And one of the famous economists, Joseph Schumpeter, who came to the United States from Austria back in the 1930s, he was very influential at the time of the Great Depression. And one of his theories was that recessions really are a platform for driving new innovation, because every time an economy goes through turmoil such as that we're experiencing, it's really a period of creative destruction where new innovation has to come into place to solve the challenges, to solve the problems and issues that are before us. And so what we're facing now as we look to move out of this lockdown and into an economy that seems to be rapidly contracting is another period of this evolution, this creative destruction of what was, and now moving into a period of figuring out what we need to do as we go forward. And something to understand in that is, when we talk about innovation and IP, it's hidden wealth. A lot of people identify wealth on the tangible side, which is the real estate and the stocks and the bonds and things like that. But that's only a small part of wealth. The bulk of it lies below the iceberg, so to speak. 85% of it is intangible. That's where innovation and IP lies. And as you read about or you hear about the decline in the stock market, the decline in real estate, things like that, that's the tangible assets that are going down in value. But there's intangible assets with tremendous wealth locked inside below the iceberg that is waiting to be unleashed. So really, as tangible wealth goes down, it's not that wealth will never come back. It will be reborn, and it will be reborn through this intangible wealth that exists below the iceberg. And that's what innovation and IP and licensing is all about, is releasing that value into the marketplace to rebuild economies, get the businesses moving again, and start generating new wealth. And one of the things about innovation and intellectual property, there's been many studies done on, how is this IP created? How is this innovation created? How is this wealth created? And one of the resources is the World Bank, and they look at studies of countries all around the world to determine what value lies inside of a country in terms of the resources they have, their laws, infrastructure, access to capital, and the ability for people to come together and use those resources to create wealth. And they've documented this in numerous studies, and they look at countries. And in the United States, one of the statistics that they provide is the projection that inside the United States, there's over $700,000 in wealth for every person, every citizen in the United States. And you say, what is that? It's the potential of innovation inside the country based on what we have to work with here, meaning the mature IP laws, the resources, the knowledge, the know-how, the universities, putting that all together to create the wealth. And that's where, as we go forward, the evolution or the creation of new wealth as this economy goes into turmoil will come from. And it's also important to understand that we've been here before. This is not the first time that we've faced a severe economic downturn of the magnitude that is being discussed. There was a period in the 1930s where the United States went through another total meltdown. In fact, the whole world went through another total economic meltdown, and that was the Great Depression. And during the Great Depression, part of what was used to help rebound the economy, rebuild the economies, was intellectual property, because they recognized then that intellectual property was a big driver of innovation and a big driver of motivating entrepreneurs and businesses to move forward, to develop the innovation they needed to move the economy forward and out of the Depression. And in fact, as part of the New Deal programs, both copyrights and trademarks were enhanced. And as a result of those programs inside the New Deal, copyrights, the enhancement of copyrights helped to promote and create the media entertainments, particularly the movie industry during the 1930s, where you had a number of movie studios who got their starts right in the heart of the Great Depression, because there was now an incentive for them, knowing that their intellectual property, their creations, their entertainment would be protected and they could use that and benefit from it. Same thing with trademarks. In the Great Depression, they enhanced trademark law. And as a result of that, they added to it ways for designers and producers of products to enhance their protection. And it stimulated consumer demand for brands, particularly luxury brands, because up until that point, there was a lot of commodities being sold, but they needed a way to incentivize producers to create more. Obviously, if they create more and there was more to purchase and people started buying more, it would start to spark the economy and start generating jobs, which in fact it did. So it was a big part of the 1930s recovery, but intellectual property goes back further than that. And in fact, intellectual property created an economy, because when our country was founded, we broke away from the British Empire, which is what the colonies' economy was based on. And so when the United States was founded, part of the US Constitution, inside the Constitution, were IP rights, the protection of IP rights, because the founders, some of whom were inventors themselves, recognized that IP was critical to encourage the innovation that was going to be needed to build the economy of the United States. And in fact, the first head of the Patent Office was Thomas Jefferson, who became the third president of the United States. And that was no coincidence. They understood what the value and the importance of intellectual property to creating an economy is. And as a result of that, that helped catapult and springboard and build the US economy. And I share this with you so that you get a perspective of intellectual property and innovation as it relates historically, because I think there's some trails that we can follow, but also some confirmation that regardless of what is going on, there is a way forward, and innovation and IP are going to be a big part of that. Now, when you look at intellectual property and you look at businesses, you have to understand that intellectual property actually helps to reduce the impact of a down economy on a business. And it does so in three ways. The first is it creates a stable asset in uncertain times. You know, while tangible assets are declining in value, intangible assets, particularly intellectual property, retains its value and goes up. We'll talk about this a little bit more. So it's much more stable because that's the future of growth. Second of all, It's a way for businesses to be creative in creating new solutions, new innovation. That's the foundation. That's the main ingredient for businesses who are going to move forward. That's why it helps reduce the impact, because that innovation is needed. And third, your intellectual property is agile and adaptable. And it's agile and adaptable because it's an asset that can be moved around, and it can be moved around through licensing. And that agility means that you can do things with it that you can't do with fixed assets and intangible assets. You can do things, and I'm going to be talking about that, to help propel your business forward, to help generate revenues. Doesn't matter about the economy. And it's also adaptable. It's adaptable to whatever market conditions exist, especially if they're financially challenging. So it's a very resilient asset. And as I've said, it maintains its value. And in fact, IP-intensive industries are the ones that are the most resilient in an economic crisis. What do I mean by IP-intensive? Industries today that use a lot of intellectual property, such as entertainment, technology, healthcare, things like that, that are very IP heavy, are going to retain, be much more resilient, because again, they have so much innovation locked inside. And also too, investment in that innovation is going to increase. It has to, because it's that innovation that's going to go forward. What existed prior to this situation, new solutions are required, new innovation is required. That's where the money is going to flow. It's not going to flow into the previous fixed assets, hard assets, tangible things that were working previously. It has to find new opportunities, and that's why investment in IP tends to go up in a down economy. And the businesses that have IP tend to have higher survival rates, and the reason that they do is because of some of the things that I mentioned, but the flexibility, the agility of it, the ability to create partnerships, create business models, generate revenues, innovate, even get funding. Is IP gives you this flexibility, and it's just a question of understanding what your IP and how to use it. In most cases, you may have your IP and you have it inside of a single product or single technology or a single service. And I'm going to show you later on different ways of using it, but you have to understand that it's your ability to use your intellectual property that gives you a much higher survival rate, an ability to survive and thrive coming out of this by using your intellectual property. And it's that agility that lets you adapt to changing market. You know, as we go into the market, no matter what industry you're in, these industries will go through a decline. Maybe it's travel, maybe it's entertainment, maybe it's whatever it is. So you're going to have to adapt to a different set of market circumstances. And that adaptation is either going to come through recalibrating your business in your particular industry, or looking at a way of adapting to the changing market and maybe going into new markets. So it gives you the opportunity to capitalize on these opportunities and do it quickly, because as the economy is all over the place and is in turmoil, we don't have a lot of time to make a lot of decisions as we once did. The time period of years has now been reduced to months, because as we come out of this, for every business, the challenge is, what are we going to do? How are we going to do it? And where can we go? And that's where your IP is an advantage. And also, spending more on IP makes a business more attractive. Why? Again, it goes back to this idea of innovation, because without innovation, there are no solutions. Without solutions, these crises and problems continue forward. And history has shown that the businesses that continue to invest in their innovation are the ones that not only survive, but they're the ones that really thrive in the upturn. You can go back in history and look at all the businesses that were actually created during the 1930s. In fact, the 1930s, during the height of the Depression, was one of the most innovative periods in the history of the United States. And the reason for that is there were a lot of problems to solve. There was a depression, over 25% unemployment, banks had crashed, the markets had gone down 90%. So the challenge in front of them is, how do you continue to survive in this? And that is by creating innovation that enables you to adapt to this market and create things that people need for a contracted period, for a contracted economic period, because there's no longer going to be the same set of circumstances that enable people to do the things that they once did, businesses do the things they once did, not only here, but around the world. And that is why investing in IP is even more attractive. Now, licensing is ideally suited today for this economy in turmoil, especially today, more so than it ever has been historically. And the reasons for that are several. And one is that there was, and there is now an even bigger appetite for licensing and collaboration. And the reason for that is because as we move into this new paradigm, right now it's going to be a specialization focus. What do I mean by that? Because now, whereas companies used to be, let's call them full, doing everything from concepting products through R&D, taking it into testing, moving it into the market, setting up their own marketing, distribution, sales, advertising, etc. That's no longer possible. The reason is because everything is contracting, the resources aren't there anymore. So specialization means, what is your strength? For example, larger companies today who have been mature in the markets, whether it's in healthcare or technology, they've established the infrastructure of sales, marketing, distribution, customer service, okay? But within their organizations, they've also had an R&D process that's been very long and cumbersome, and they can't do it anymore, especially now with the market changing. So what happens is they have to look to the outside. And in fact, in a survey that was done after the last recession by 130 global companies around the world, over 60% of them said that in the time of economic downturn, they look outside. They look for collaborations and licensing to find the innovation, to find the technologies they need to move forward into the market. That was happening prior to this situation, this economic situation in front of us. It's now even more so. Now today, with all the changes going on, just look at healthcare. Healthcare is just under tremendous burden around the world to solve huge, huge problems. The demand now for outside innovation is going to skyrocket, and is skyrocketing by these large companies who have to go outside to find their innovation. And that's the opportunity for you, because they need you. They need your IP. And the third point, and this is the most important point to understand, for the first time in history, there's a global market for intellectual property and licensing. Back in the previous economic meltdown in the 30s, really the only game in town for intellectual property was the United States and Western Europe. Those were the two areas that had the most mature intellectual property laws and had the ability to transact with one another. And that was it. That was the extent of it. So the opportunities for intellectual property in many ways were very limited, yet that IP still delivered the innovation needed. You fast forward today, and now it's a global marketplace. And for the first time in history, the entire world is in the IP game. You've seen regions that just 20 years ago were not involved in licensing, did not have adequate intellectual property laws, have them today. Look at China, look at India, Africa, Central, South America, all around the world. These countries have spent the last 15 and 20 years maturing their intellectual property laws, their infrastructure, their government agencies. And now for the first time in history, you have the ability, intellectual property has the ability to move around the globe. And licensing is the strategy that allows that process to happen. That's your ability. That's why it's such a powerful strategy for this market, because it can be used globally. You have to understand that in this economic crisis, with your intellectual property, you are not locked into trying to survive in your own backyard. Okay, for the first time in history, you have the ability to go outside to the world, to work with partnerships and markets and find places where your IP can help you thrive and start to generate revenues, rebuild your business, expand your opportunities that didn't exist during the last economic crisis. So let me stop here and talk about a quick review of intellectual property, because I think this is something that's important for everybody to understand. And I'm not talking about understand meaning, Rand, you know, yeah, I know copyright, trademarks, and patents. I'm talking about really to give you a little bit more context and understanding of intellectual property, because this piece is going to be very important as we get into the strategies, because you will see how these pieces of IP are used. So the way intellectual property is developed and protected involves two sides. Okay, one is the type of intellectual property, and that's the registered and unregistered. That's the most well-known: patents, trademarks, and copyrights. Okay, those are what's called registered. Okay, you go to a government agency, you register, you get your patent filed. Okay, that creates your protection. On the other side is unregistered: trade secrets and know-how. And in the last 2 decades, the unregistered side has skyrocketed in terms of the value of what that intellectual property is. Trade secrets, know-how, everything from algorithms to AI to back-end systems to processes to know-how, everything, many things related to healthcare technologies all have trade secrets and know-how. And in fact, it's the trade secret and know-how side of intellectual property that's been a big part of the issue of what Trump has been advocating with the tariffs against China, because of all the IP theft. A lot of it is based around trade secret. But that's just the type of intellectual property. And you have to understand that once you protect it, once you get a patent, trademark, then inside or underneath those types of IP are your IP assets, because what happens is that's the type of IP. But what is involved in licensing is really about the IP assets, the assets that you create underneath that. And that's something that people overlook or fail to understand. And your IP assets, there's 5 types of IP assets, if you really will. There's the marketing component, all the things that you do to sell your customer lists, the way you do things, the way you process things, the way you make things, the way you deliver things. Your customers, your customer list, the way you acquire customers, the way you sell your customers, the way you deliver to your customers, that's all intellectual property. The artistic side of your websites, graphics, advertising, promotion, packaging, you name it. That's your artistic. The contract side, your contracts are valuable intellectual property, whether it's contracts with suppliers, vendors, whatever the case is. Inside those contracts are a lot of know-how and things that you've done with them that benefits your company. That's valuable intellectual property. And then, of course, technology, products, technology, circuits, whatever the case is, there's the technology assets. That's probably the most well-known, is the technology assets. But you have to realize that in that pie of assets, that's where your opportunity with your intellectual property lies. And it's understanding what your IP assets are that it will enable you to take advantage and use licensing effectively. Many times when clients come to me, one of the first things I do is spend a lot of time asking them questions, because one of the things that I want to uncover, or I need to uncover, is what are their IP assets. I know that, you know, oftentimes a client will come to me and they have a patent. Let's say it's a medical device. They've patented a medical device. Okay, but that's a patent, a utility patent for the way something functions and works. Okay, but behind it is the product and the technology. So I start asking questions about that medical device. How does it work? What does it do? And then slowly we discover that there's know-how behind it in the form of algorithms, because it collects data. We suddenly discover that there's trade secrets behind it in the way that it interacts with its customers. We suddenly discover that there's other market applications in the way the technology can be used and applied to other markets. See, that's the asset side of intellectual property, and that's the one that most people miss. They stay over on the IP type side and they miss the IP asset side. It's your assets. That's what you want to get a handle on, because those are the pieces. The assets are where the value of your intellectual property lies, and the assets are what you use to create the partnerships, generate revenues, expand markets, and build value. So you have to realize that the whole world is surrounded by intellectual property. Everything you wear, eat, ride in, watch, work with, buildings, clothing, you name it, it's all intellectual property. Everything around you is intellectual property. See, the challenge is we look at the world through tangible eyes because we're acclimated to that. We're educated that way. We're educated to see it as a TV or a cell phone or whatever the case it is. Okay, we're not acclimated to looking at it as a bundle of intangible rights. When you look at your smartphone, okay, this is just a bundle of IP rights. Okay, the companies that make this, they may have a patent on the design of the smartphone. They own the trademark on the smartphone, but inside the screen, the apps, the components, the technology, all of that, they don't own that. They have to license that. It's bundles of IP. And the same thing exists for most of the products and services that you use around you. They're all bundles of IP. Somebody created that, somebody owns that IP, and they have to be assembled in order for a lot of these products to be made, whether it's refrigerators, freezers, cars, you name it. You know, when you drive in your car, you call it's a smart car now. That smart car is nothing but a bundle of intellectual property rights. So by understanding that you're surrounded by intellectual property, again, it helps you to create an awareness of what you've got. And today you have to understand IP rights are more valuable than a product. A single product is not as valuable as the underlying intellectual property rights because it's those intellectual property rights that increase in value. The products come and go. These products come and go, but the intellectual property rights continue on. They stay on. I mean, in some intellectual property, such as patents, obviously have a limited time, but trade secrets, know-how, trademarks, those can go on in perpetuity. And many of them do, and many of them are incredibly valuable. And that's what you have to understand. Even if products come and go, even if products get obsoleted, that doesn't mean the underlying intellectual property is obsolete. I'm going to show you some strategies that capitalize on that. And it's important to understand that. So because of the value of intellectual property rights, because the world has finally gotten together with their intellectual property laws, the revenues, the ability of intellectual property to generate huge revenues has skyrocketed, especially as you get into the late 90s and into the 2000s as countries, as IP laws matured, as countries got together, as government agencies built out infrastructures in these countries. That's when you really start to see IP royalties skyrocket. And those royalties are being generated as a result of companies and businesses of all types and all sizes coming together and using their intellectual property and sharing their intellectual property rights to move them around the world and generate revenue. And what you see here is a chart put together by the World Bank, but these are only estimates. Nobody even knows the extent of what's being generated with intellectual property, because you have to understand IP is the largest asset class in the world. There's more IP than any other type of asset in the world. And a lot of it may not be usable. Even if you took out 50 or 75% of it, there's still an enormous amount, because you have to understand the world now is in the intellectual property game. It's just not the number of patents filed in the United States anymore. It's in China, it's in India, it's in Europe, it's in Asia, it's in Africa. It's coming from everywhere. And it's huge and it's enormous and it's growing. And what this graph shows you is the immense value that is locked inside and is generating the amount of royalty revenues. And you say, well, what does this mean going forward? The answer is this is just going to increase, because royalty revenues are the flow from the new innovation, are what the value that's created from that innovation, is the money that's created from that innovation. And as we go forward in an economy where we don't know what's going to come out, using your IP to generate revenues makes sense, because with financial contractions, with a limitation of resources, partnerships are the only way to go. And when you look at the most successful companies in the world, they're all based on intellectual property. All of the top companies, the most valuable companies, are all based on their intellectual property and innovation. In fact, the note was somebody in the chat. I got the note that it said that 85% of the value of companies today is in intellectual property. That's absolutely correct. When you look at the value of businesses today, it's not in their factories, and warehouses and raw materials and all that. No, it's in their intellectual property. In fact, when you look at some of the largest acquisitions that have occurred over the last 20 years, it hasn't been for plant, equipment, inventory. It's been about intellectual property. It's been about acquiring patent portfolio, customer lists, trade secrets, and know-hows. And we're talking hundreds of millions, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. And you can even see this in the media today when you look at the huge litigations, cases that have been going on, the fighting that goes between Apple and Qualcomm and Microsoft and Nokia and whoever it is. What are they battling over? They're not battling over products. They're not battling over, employees. They're battling over IP. That's what this is about, because IP is the underlying core. That's the value. That's what differentiates them. That's what sets them apart. That's where they're making their money on. And, a lot of this litigation has to do with contract negotiations. A lot of litigation has to do with whether or not claims are stepping on each other's toes, whatever the case is. My guess is that's going to change a lot as we go forward. I mean, IP litigation, yes, in a time before we are now, maybe there was, an appropriate place for that. But going forward, I'm not sure how much the market can sustain IP litigation, because there isn't a lot of money to litigate. Anybody that has been involved in IP litigation, we're talking millions of dollars. So going forward, that's not just that kind of money is going to be hard pressed for anybody to have to spend. So let's jump into the strategy part of this thing. And let's look at the strategy. So you understand, licensing is a big playbook, a big strategy playbook. Okay, there's a lot of ways you can use licensing. And I'm going to take you through these here today. And I want you to know there are more. Okay, I couldn't put them all. My purpose here today is to help you understand the scope and the breadth and the depth and the options you have of using your intellectual property and licensing. So we're going to take a look at these strategies, how they're used, and how you can use them in your own business. And again, for some of you, this may be new. For some of you may not have thought about it. So I encourage you, as I go through this, there'll be, you'll be able to get this replay. The idea is to start to get you thinking, because obviously we have some downtime here. The economy's not open yet. The point here is, if you understand what your options are, if you understand what the licensing strategies are, you can start to think about your business. Now, the first strategy and the first thing that everybody should do who's watching this workshop, participating here, is I encourage you, do an audit. You need to do an inventory of your IP. You have IP. Every business has IP. You may not see it. You may not know it. So going back to that chart, you remember I talked about you have the IP type and the IP asset. So here, there's what I put up there is give you an example of what an audit is involved in. You need to just set up a spreadsheet and start listing all your assets, all your IP, your products, your services, your technologies, your formulas, your business plans, your source code, your web. You need to list it all. Okay, and then next to it, you need to identify what type it is. And this is really important because for several reasons. Okay, first of all, one of the most important reasons is anytime we're going through a huge economic change like this and there's a downsizing of businesses, okay, you have employees, you have suppliers, you have vendors who have worked with you. They may have worked on your intellectual property or parts of your intellectual property. You need to first make sure that you've secured that from them, that you have work for hires in place, that you've gotten all the information, that you've gotten all the documents. If you have trade secrets and customer lists, you have to make sure you've got those secure so they don't wind up moving over to your competitor. That's why you need to do an inventory. You need to get these down, because without that inventory, it makes it really challenging to figure out how you can use your IP. Because the more extensive you do an inventory, and I mean really dig down, the more you're going to have, or the more you're going to be able to find opportunities. You're going to be able to mine for opportunities, because you have to understand, as you go through these assets, keep in mind, IP type is just general. Okay, we hear about licensing, patents, and trademarks all the time. But when it comes to the actual licensing, it's the individual IP assets that are the important part of the licensing agreement, because these assets are the ways that you carve up the rights, the ways that you determine who's going to do what, the different markets, the different applications, whatever it is, okay? And you have to understand what you've got. And also the important thing about doing the audit is when you start to develop this audit with your assets, you're going to be able to see that you've got pieces in there. And as I go through these strategies, you're going to be able to see how you can use these pieces in multiple ways for several of these strategies. So if you don't know how to do an audit, visit my website. I've got a special report there on how to do IP audits. It's real straightforward. If you need help, I'm happy to work with you on doing an IP audit. You can give me a call. You'll have my contact information at the end of this presentation, but it will be the single best thing that you can do right now with your business to get yourself oriented and focused on licensing. The next thing that you have to reason why it's very important that you do an audit is because of this first strategy, IP linking. IP linking is one of the most potent licensing strategies out there. It's taking several types of IP and putting them all together. And what that does is it reinforces your protection, gives you more of a competitive advantage. And IP linking is used extensively by companies all around the world. You may have even used IP linking, but maybe never identified it. And really what it's doing is it's putting your assets together with your IP in multiple ways. So for example, you may have a trademark and a patent. And let's use that as an example. I mean, you've got phones which are patented, and then they wrap a trademark around it called Apple. Okay, so now you've got two layers of protection. You've got your trademark and your patent. And your trademark obviously extends beyond your patent life. But it's important when you combine the two, it gives you the opportunity to extend the life of the protection of your underlying patent because you've got a trademark on top of it. Trade secrets and trademark. This is a very big category. Trade secrets, formulas, recipes, these are big. And in fact, when you look at Listerine, is one of the oldest licensing agreements in the world for the Listerine, goes way back probably 100 years to Warner Lambert, getting this from the inventor of Listerine. Because see, trade secrets never expire as long as you keep them confidential, and trademarks won't expire as long as you stay on top of them and manage the maintenance. And as a result, they can pay out in perpetuity. And when you link a trade secret with a trademark, it's big. Just look at Coca-Cola or Kentucky Fried Chicken or any number of big brands, big businesses who have some kind of secret formula or secret recipe combined with a brand. They've linked those two together to create incredible value, build an incredible business, a valuable business. Another linking is copyrights and trademarks. One of the best examples, obviously, is entertainment, but books. Let's look at, the Harry Potter books. They started as a copyright, a book with a title that became a trademark, a brand. Linking that together, then from there, using the copyright and the trademark, expanding out into merchandise and movies and TV shows and you name it. By linking that IP together and moving it into the market together, it creates incredible value. Patents and trade secrets. Today, most technologies in just about every industry, if there's a patented technology up front, if there's a patented product up front, especially if it communicates, connects to the customer, engages the customer or the business or whatever it is, and is generating back-end data, if it's got a computer chip in it, if it's got source code in it, if it's got an algorithm in it, it's got a trade secret. And that's what most technology has today, especially in certain areas like healthcare, where there's a lot of data transmission and patient records and things like that. Smart cars, things of that nature. I mean, there's all sorts of technologies going forward that are going to and do have trade secrets in the form of data. Data is big business. A lot of data is a trade secret. And for a lot of companies, combining a patent and trade secret can be effective, very effective. And in fact, as you look at your own technology, one of the things to consider is whether or not your patent, it's worth patenting your technology. Oftentimes you can keep it as a trade secret. It just depends on where the real value of your technology lies. And if it's in more the back end, it may be more worthwhile to keep your technology as a trade secret than as a patent. And yeah, and actually there's a good point here. Sometimes it's known as IP stacking. Thank you. One of the viewers reminded me of that. But yeah, it's called IP stacking. That's another variation of it. It's like thinking about it. You stack all this IP on top of each other, it creates bigger value. And so that's one of the things to be thinking about. And the same thing holds true with software. You know, when you look at software, you look at something like Windows, you know, they wrap that, they stack it with a lot of IP. They link it with a lot of IP, trade secrets, copyright, and trademark. Even a trade dress design around the packaging and the color of the box. See, when you link all of this together and you put it all together, this is what creates tremendous value. And also, as you link your IP together, it gives you more licensing opportunities. That's the point I was making when I talked about doing that audit and understanding what you have, because if you look at what you've got and the assets you have inside and the ways that you can license them, you know, maybe it's a combination. Maybe your business has developed so much goodwill that your brand and trademark combined with some of your IP assets and licensed out can really be a value driver for your business. So the next strategy with licensing is obviously revenue opportunities. And many of these revenue opportunities that will exist for you is really a new market application. See, you may have an IP behind your product and your product may be developed. And you may be looking at it as, okay, our product is for this market over here. We do rehab clinics and things like that, and that's all we do. But if you do an audit and you start to understand all your assets, maybe there's some pieces of your entire product that can be taken out and used in other market applications, such as standing desks or security platforms or whatever the case is. See, it doesn't, your IP and all your assets here, it doesn't have to stay combined in a single product or technology. It's quite the opposite. There's an opportunity to break it out. That's the flexibility of intellectual property, is to be able to break it out. And by understanding what assets you have and how you can link them and combine them with your IP, you can move them into new market applications, which gives you more revenue, more opportunities. See, even if your direct market dies, that doesn't mean you're out of business. It just means you need to move to another business. And I'm going to show you some strategies involved in moving to new businesses, shifting, pivoting, things like that. But the point being is, if you understand where new market applications are, those new market applications are also new revenue opportunities. You can use licensing to expand your business. Okay, this is one of the best ways to expand a business. Instead of spending the money to develop the promotions, hire the sales forces, all of that expensive stuff, which now is even more expensive and probably not an option because of what we're facing, is to use licensing to expand out. And here's a gentleman who did licensing before licensing was even really known as licensing. That's Dale Carnegie. And he wrote a book. Of course, he wrote a book in the middle of the Great Depression. But the point being is, he understood what his book was or is as intellectual property. So when he started teaching his courses and creating his courses and realized his limitation was the fact that he was delivering them himself, and he could only be in some place, certain places at certain times, which limited him, much like you see today with anybody who's in professional know-how, consulting, advising on an hourly basis, or has to be location-based, and being able to show up and go there limits, you know, where you can be and how much you can generate. But if you take and you free up your IP and realize, wait a minute, I may have limitations on how many places that I can be and how many hours a day I can deliver my technology or service or know-how, but my IP can be in many places, in many time zones, doing the same thing for me. And I can do that through licensing. In this case, what Dale Carnegie did is started licensing his courses out, and he quickly expanded to thousands of students. And now today, the Dale Carnegie seminars and training is one of the largest in the world. And they do that through licensing. That's how they expanded the business. So at a time when Dale Carnegie was severely restricted with financial resources in the middle of the Depression, he figured out he could put his IP to work. And that's the same thing that you can do in expanding your business. Put your IP to work. Understand what you have and how to put it to work, because when you put your IP to work, you can expand your business. Your IP is also a way you can quickly adapt to a changing market. Now, when I talk about intellectual property and licensing, you have to understand that you can license out your IP, but licensing is also an effective strategy for getting something that you don't have to adapt to a changing market. Take a look at the pharmaceutical industry today. Healthcare is changing very quickly, is going digital. And these giants are not digital technology companies. They're pharmaceutical companies. They're not suited for this fast changing, fast evolving digital marketplace. So they turned immediately to licensing. They started partnering up with some of these up and coming technology startups, digital healthcare startups, to get the types of mobile technology, digital healthcare technologies they needed to connect with their customers for insulin medicine, in being able to monitor them and have a constant communication with their customers so they can best manage how they use their diabetes solutions or whatever the case is. But these giant pharmaceuticals didn't try to do it on their own. The market is moving just too fast for them. They can't do it on their own. So they turn to licensing and they form these big partnerships. And you can do the same thing. Just because you don't have the specific piece of technology or IP, or you see an opportunity in a market, doesn't mean you have to reinvent the wheel. Doesn't mean that you have to go in there. There's, as I said earlier, there's a lot of great IP that's out there, a lot of developed IP out there, and with a little creative thought and understanding of licensing strategies, there's opportunities for you to grab it, add it to your business, and immediately be able to adapt to a changing market. So, you know, when you look at this, look at your IP from two ways. One, how can I use it to go out to others who are facing fast changing markets like the healthcare and a lot of others, and present it to them as a solution to get them into the market or solve their problems. And at the same point, I've got this technology, my market has shifted over here. What do I need to be able to compete in this changing market? And if you identify it, you can get it through licensing. And that leads to the next one, which is really shifting a business model, because with licensing, you can shift your business model. And when I say shift your business model, it means you are shifting completely out of the make and sell and moving to the innovate and create model. And that is used so that what your business can focus on, if you remember, I talked about the specialization, what they're good at, which is the innovation side. And for many of you watching today, for many businesses that you know about or that you work with, their real value is in what they innovate. Their real value is in their technology. And as we go into a market where the resources aren't going to be there to really be able to build out the infrastructure of a company, it may be time to think about using licensing to shift your business model, shift to a license and innovate model. That's what Texas Instrument did. They did it out of desperation, simply because they were about to go BK. But when they shifted their model, they got out of the production business and they got into the licensing business, realized the value of their IP was in the innovation, not making and selling it. They had a tremendous turnaround and generated hundreds of millions of dollars in royalty revenues. And they're not the only one that used that model. One of the things you'll find with the strategies, as I share them with you, you'll see crossover. You'll see variations of them. You'll see how they cross from one to the other. That's the beauty of licensing and IP. It's not necessarily each strategy is completely siloed and individual. No, it's not the case. They actually share characteristics. And in the next strategy, which is a pivot strategy, many businesses start with a pivot and eventually shift. Okay, that happens as well. What's the difference between a pivot and shift? A pivot is where you're taking part of your business and pivoting it over. You're trying another approach to the marketplace. Sometimes it's another approach to figure out how you can better sell your core technology. Other times it's a pivot to get out of a piece of your business that just is weighing you down or is no longer profitable. That's what Nokia did. They got out of the cell phone production business, the smartphone. They decided to license it out in 2014 and decided to focus on the value that their brand and other underlying technologies offered the marketplace. So they created Nokia Technologies. They licensed out the smartphone business. In fact, they licensed it to a company who took that license along with their brand and became one of the top 10 smartphone producers in the world because of the Nokia name and the Nokia brand. And that's the same thing you can do. You can look at your business, again, going back, is there a piece of it? Are there some IP assets that you'd be better off starting to pivot out of, to use licensing to move them in a different direction, to let somebody else run with them? If that's the case, you can start. You know, another example is big apparel companies, Calvin Klein, Tommy Hilfiger, a number of them. They started licensing their brands out. And slowly over the decades, they started with a pivot in one product category, whether it's ties or underwear or whatever they did. And eventually, their licensing, they shifted their entire business model to licensing. And now most of these big apparel brands no longer make anything. They license it all. And what happens is now they're generating hundreds of millions of dollars, but the thing about it is that revenue is all going to the bottom line because they don't have to produce anything. They don't have to sell anything. Their licensees are doing it. They focus on their brand. Obviously, these brands have been well entrenched, but that's the same thing you can do. You can use licensing to start pivot a part of your business out of the marketplace, and you can do that right now. Even if your business is stalled because as we come out of this, you realize your market is contracted, start moving out of the market. Take a piece, take some of your assets and start licensing them out. Incremental IP. Okay, most IP created today is incremental, meaning it improves other products and technologies, also known as ingredient licensing. What's inside? One of the most overlooked and powerful licensing strategies is putting your IP inside other people's IP, inside their products and services. This is big. The most, probably the most familiar examples, Intel Inside, Gore-Tex, Scotchgard, okay? They aren't tangible products on the market. You can't buy an Intel thing. You can't buy a Gore-Tex. You can buy products that incorporate it, that use it. In fact, it's prominently displayed on their packaging. How many computers do you buy that you see Intel Inside? It is valuable to the computer manufacturer because it enhances the value. It enhances the consumer perception of the value of that product. And it's also good. It's a good chip and improves the quality. Is this something that your technology, your IP can do? Whether it's materials, chemicals, fabrics, technologies, which I'm going to talk about it. Are there pieces, do you have some IP assets that if you peeled them off and offered them to other companies to put inside their IP, inside their products, would that bring value to them? Would they be able to use that in a way that would enhance their products? If so, you've got a licensing opportunity. That's a great opportunity and a great way to move into the licensing market. Again, this is an example. I talked about the pivot earlier. You take a piece of your asset and you decide you want to use it as an ingredient, as a brand, as incremental inside, you can pivot into licensing, make it an ingredient licensing program. It's a natural flow of being able to use your IP. And remember, you're not going to lose control of your IP. You will remain control. What you're doing is you're figuring out a way to use your IP assets to generate more revenue. And you do that through licensing deals. Another way that you can make money with your IP is to pool it. Patent pools are huge, okay? Now, patent pools have been around for a long time. They started way back in the 1800s with the sewing machine wars. You see, anytime a really breakthrough and valuable technology comes along where a lot of people, a lot of businesses are going to be playing it, they have to create patent pools. So these patent pools are created, sometimes voluntarily, sometimes by the government, as a result of allowing an industry to flourish without winding up suing each other over litigation rights. So today, you see many patent pools that have been created around technologies, especially internet-based technologies. There's video, such as MPEG-LA, one of the biggest patent pools in the world, generating hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in royalties. Every time you use video on your phone, in your computer, whatever, MPEG gets a royalty, okay? DVD technology went into patent pools. See, what happens is all these IP owners, these huge companies, multinational companies from around the world, develop these technologies. And they all realize that if they keep them to themselves, all they're going to do is wind up in litigation, okay? And as pointed out, smartphones is another example. There's patent pools for smartphone. See, Apple and Nokia and whoever else could never make a smartphone unless there was a patent pool that they could get the rights to use the underlying technologies. And that's important to understand. Whoops, hold on a second here. That's important to understand. Whoops. Let me get back here. Hold on a second. Okay, what's important to understand is that's why these patent pools are created. And you can participate in those patent pools. Generally, they're what are called essential patents, meaning that they're absolutely necessary for companies to use. Like, for example, on the smartphone, you know, this LED screen. Okay, every smartphone has to use it, but not every company has patented their own LED screen. Somebody else did that. So that patent is thrown into these pools, and these pools can contain thousands and thousands of patents. And what happens, you go to these pools and they license them out, like I told you about the MPEG. So they license them out, and then they share the royalties among all the patent owners in those pools. And you can do the same thing, because as we go forward, and especially in industries like healthcare, smart cars, sustainable technologies, things like that, patent pools are going to need to be formed, because there's no way that the new technologies being developed are going to be able to do that going forward, because they're going to need other technologies. Remember I showed you about inside, the incremental technology inside. Well, for many devices, especially communication devices, healthcare devices, they've got stuff inside. They've got components inside. They've got source code inside. They've got whatever, much like a smartphone, okay? There's going to be patent pools that have to be formed to allow them to be able to use those technologies to make that happen. IoT, okay, the Internet of Things, to connect a device to the Internet, okay? You need to get licenses for that, because there's companies that are developing the backbone for IoT networks. And the IoT is not just about setting up a device and plugging into the internet and away you go. That's not how it works. These Internet of Things are very secure, very specific, with very sophisticated technologies to enable devices to connect to each other, deliver information, do the things that they need to do to be successful as digital communicating devices. But for your device to get in there, you have to get an IoT license. You have to get the technology to put inside your product, your technology, to make it IoT. So you'll go to a patent pool to get those rights. And the same thing holds true. You may have a technology that can go into a patent pool. And by the way, patent pools are not only for large corporations, there's small patent pools being formed by companies who want to share their technology. And I'll show you, talk to you here in just a minute about a strategy that enables you to do that as well. And by the way, when you go into a patent pool, it doesn't mean that you can't use your technology. That's not the point of the patent pool. It just means you're sharing your technology with others and allowing them to use it. So think of it this way. This is the whole concept behind licensing. You can still have the right to use your IP. You can use it and sell it. But the beauty of it is, when you produce and sell something, you get paid. When somebody else uses your IP, produces and sells something, you get paid as well. So you're getting paid both ways. You just get a smaller percentage for them. But the point is your IP is in the market, going to work for you. It's an asset you're putting to work for you. It's no, you know, as we go into this economic challenge, it's not about competing, it's about cooperating. It's about taking what we know we've got as great IP, as innovative solutions, reapplying them, repurposing and reusing them, and sharing them through collaboration so that we can start, you know, the business ball rolling, get the economy rolling, and starting to build value and making money for everybody. The next thing you can do with your IP is repackage it. See, just because you develop your IP as a device in a plastic box, okay, or software in a box, doesn't mean you can't repackage it. You can take your IP and bundle it up and sell it as part of a bundle with other people's IP, okay? Or you could take your digital products that's just been online and box them up and put them in a box and sell it as a box. Package it up with some other tangible products. Okay, you can change the form of your IP. Okay, just because your IP is in a plastic component doesn't mean it can't go into something else. Just because your technology is cloud-based doesn't mean it can't be put in another form. Okay, Google is an algorithm that exists on the internet. They came up with Alexa, and now you speak to Alexa on speakers and interactive devices. That's just changing the form of what Google's algorithm is, but it's still the algorithm. They've just partnered it with a tangible form, added a voice, a smart voice, so that now you're talking to it. So they changed the form. It's just another way to drive revenues for your IP. It's another way to put your IP to work. And then another way to repackage your IP is to unbundle it. I talked to you about doing that audit. Well, this is why, because if you can unbundle it and separate your design rights and your brands and your customer lists and whatever it is, you can repackage them and license them out. See, when we talk about repackaging, it's just a way of bringing your IP into the marketplace in these different forms. And it's also one of the most effective. A lot of companies, you know, such as the example I gave you with Google, use repackaging as a way to get the same underlying technology, the same IP into the marketplace, just in a different form. It gives you choice. It's like taking the IP and saying, okay, how do customers like to consume our IP? Well, some customers like to consume it online. Some customers like to get it in a tangible form. Some customers like to get it as a music box, who knows? So that's the same thing you need to think about is how can I repackage my IP to deliver it to my customers? And another way that you can think about your IP and really put it to work is to think about converting it. Let's say your IP is in a box as a product, why not convert it to a service? One of the most common forms of a service is a subscription service, meaning they get your product, but on the back end, there's a subscription service, whether it's internet-enabled device, or sometimes you have products up front that they buy, and you've seen this trend pop up with boxes, subscription boxes, where they put a lot of different products, a lot of them branded products, into a box and send them to people on a subscription basis. That's a way of converting your IP into a subscription, your product into a service. You're giving them a service on the back end that they can subscribe to and get other things with it. You see a lot of companies doing this today, especially big companies like aerospace companies who've developed jet engines and things like that. They've developed a whole slew of services on the back end because yes, do they make money selling multi-million-dollar engines? They do. But then they discovered that there was also a lot more money in providing the back end maintenance, the back end servicing, the back end, you name it. And they do that through subscriptions. And that's occurring more and more and more, is adding that service value to your product. A second way of converting it, as I had mentioned before, is by unbundling it. You look at IBM is not really a computer company anymore. They unbundled everything. They took their software, they took their computers. So they unbundle it and license it out all over the place. They have licensed resellers, they license it direct. Their software, their human resources, whatever the case is. And they license everything, you know, a lot of it is licensed out. And what happens is it all leads back to IBM. It leads back in the form of equipment purchase, it leads back into the form of cloud, it leads back into the consulting, it leads back in. These unbundling and licensing out allows them to not only generate revenue, but also to drive customer traffic back to them in the form of whatever it is, consulting or needing equipment or research or whatever it is. And you can do the same thing. How can you unbundle and drive customers back? And another variation of convert a product to a service is convert your service to a product. That basically means, do you have a service or you professional service? Maybe you do audits, your accountant do audits. So why not add a product to your audit service, like an AI document scanner that can, instead of people having to input everything, they just scan it and the thing figures out where to stick it into the accounting columns, whatever the case is. The point is if you bundle it, you've created a product with it. And so now you've given more value by giving them a product that goes with it. And you may license this product and sell it as part of your services, or you may take your services and license it to a product company. See, understanding that what your IP is and your asset is, you can find different ways to apply it, especially for companies that have maybe a product and to figure out how the heck can I get this in the market? How can I provide more value? And you can do it by offering them your services or vice versa. That's the whole idea behind intellectual property, is to be able to take that and figure out, where am I going to place it? How am I going to place it? Who am I going to place it with? How can I generate revenue with it? Because, you know, keep in mind, oftentimes you look at your intellectual property, you look at your assets, you compile it all together in your product, and you see it one way. But I can tell you from my experience, when you go into the market and you show people your IP or you demonstrate what value it has, they see it in a different way. And you'd be surprised oftentimes when you start presenting what you've got, how suddenly you'll be in a meeting and somebody's eyes will light up and go, holy cow, that's it. We've been looking for something like that. But you won't know until you have it laid out, and then you're able to think creatively, what can I do? Because see, here's the thing. When you look at your IP, when you do an audit, see, to get ready for licensing, to develop licensing strategy like I talked about, this is something you can do now. It doesn't require, you know, being in an office of legions of people. It requires just thinking. It requires just understanding what you have and then sitting down and doing some thinking about it and figuring out what really could we do with this thing. And that's the beauty of it, because once you figure it out, then implementing the licensing portion of it, that becomes then a function of marketing, because licensing, the licensing process is a marketing process. It's just what you're marketing and selling is an intellectual property license. You can reinvent your business with intellectual property and licensing. And that's exactly what BlackBerry did. BlackBerry's business took a nosedive. They were in the market. They, you know, were on a direct up, you know, growing tremendously. And then suddenly, boom, the bottom fell out and they collapsed. But what they did is they used their IP and licensing to reinvent themselves. And they're not making their BlackBerry phones. What they're doing is they're taking their brand, which became very well known. They understood that their brand, they packaged it with cybersecurity for communication devices. And now they license it out to companies and communication device providers who are looking for security. And the BlackBerry brand has such high recognition that they've been able to reinvent their business as a mobile communication device security provider. That's an example of how you reinvent your business, is by taking what you did, seeing the value in it and saying, where can we go? Can we do another market application? How can we reinvent what we're doing? And reposition it and reinvent ourselves so that you can create value for the customer. And that's what BlackBerry did, and that's what you can do with your IP. You can do the same thing. You can reinvent your business, or you can repurpose your IP. A lot of IP out there today is repurposed. Somebody figures out another application for it or a different way of using it. You know, some of the most famous examples are Viagra, which was originally for hypertension, is now, you know, for men. Play-Doh, which was originally a wallpaper cleaner. The Magic Eraser from Mr. Clean. They combined a brand with that. They found some insulation foam. Turned out to be a great way of cleaning, a great application. They licensed that foam. Oil of Olay created a wrinkle cream from wound and burn treatments. And Procter & Gamble invented a variation of Tide from a hair conditioner. These are all examples of repurposing. And this is something that you need to take a look at, is can you repurpose your IP? And when I say repurpose, it doesn't mean take it away from necessarily your core business, but it means, can it go into other things? Can it be used in other ways? And again, when you take it to the market, sometimes you don't see it, but others do see it. Maybe your R&D people, maybe your marketing people, whatever the case is. But this is an opportunity that exists for everybody. Is there a way to repurpose your IP? And a lot of times by repurposing, it brings you a whole new market opportunity for your IP. The same thing with reuse. There's a lot of good intellectual property out there that was used for one thing, but is just sitting around. Why not reuse it? I mean, component designs are one example. I mean, a lot of companies create components that go inside their computers, go inside their smart devices, whatever the case is. So once they've created that component design, it just sits there because they've already designed it and they're putting the components in. Why not license out that design? If it works for your device, it'll work for other devices. Same thing for source code. Have you developed source code for a certain software application? Not the total source code, maybe you can use parts of it. The point is you can reuse it and license it out. Video games, another example. The old Atari games, you know, they came and went and now they're back again. Somebody decided that, wow, you know what? Those brands, those underlying technologies, underlying games have value. So they use licensing to bring them back to the market. Bankrupt Brands. Here's a huge opportunity to reuse a lot of big brands that have gone bankrupt over the years, from Radio Shack to Circuit City, Pan Am, Eastern, you name it. Okay, this is a lot of IP that's sitting in the marketplace. And again, remember I said earlier on, it doesn't necessarily go away. It doesn't lose value. It has value. It's just a question of how it's applied, and it can be reused. Same thing with bankrupt companies that have a lot of underlying technology. Kodak went belly up, but they have a lot of valuable technology that can be reused for other applications. Incredible amount of technology. That's how they were bought out of bankruptcy. And now the company is basically an innovation company. They're using their underlying technologies, reusing them for other market applications. You can do the same thing. Maybe you've developed stuff over the years. Maybe you've got stuff in the vaults. Maybe your business has been around for a long time. You've got IP that's been sitting there. It doesn't necessarily mean it's not valuable. Is there a way that you can reuse that? And you can often discover that through your audit. The next strategy you can use is to create a technology platform. What is a technology platform? Technology platform means that you've got an underlying technology that you can let others build on top of. Some examples: the smartphone, like Apple, okay? It's a communication device, but it's also a technology platform. So what do? They license that platform. They allow other companies to develop apps through licensing deals to get onto that platform. Basically, it's a technology platform for products and services that allows other companies, licensees, to come on board and develop apps to connect that platform to help sell their products, help sell their services, technologies, whatever the case is. And you can do the same thing. And again, it's a question of looking at what you have developed. And do you have some kind of technology that really could be converted to a platform to let others to build on top of it? Maybe you reach a certain type of customer, maybe healthcare providers, maybe rehab, maybe clinics, whatever the case is. Is there value in letting others use your technology as a pipeline into those customers? Because that's really what it is. It's a pipeline into customers. When companies build upon, say, a smartphone, an iPhone, it's really a pipeline because they know millions of people have customers, certain customers, and they can put their apps on there to cater to those customers, and they can get pretty targeted with that. Okay, same thing holds true with software. You have software, you can let others build upon it. That's what Starbucks does. They have a software designed to manage their internal customers, manage all the processes, the systems, the sales, the inventory, whatever the case is. Okay, but they also license out that. They allow that platform, they license it out, and they allow others to build upon it to help customize it for their particular needs in the restaurant industry. So it becomes a technology platform that they license out and get paid by licensees who help enhance the software, expand it and increase it. See, every time when you develop a platform, you let others build upon it, it increases the value of your IP and it increases your potential revenue because others build upon it. So you can do the same thing. You can use what they're doing, that same kind of application for what you're doing. So when you think about your software, is there a way to turn it into a platform that others can build upon? And the third way you can do a platform is what's called open source. The previous two were closed, meaning they were controlled by the IP owner, but the third is an open source. An open source is also a variation of a patent pool. It means that you become part of a group of IP owners who are willing to allow their IP to be used by others to build upon to expand an industry. You see this in fintech a lot. And the reason that they create these open source IP agreements or allow others to use it, sometimes you have to pay for it, sometimes you don't, is because they know that the more people that build upon it, the more people that use it, eventually the industry will grow larger and there'll be more value there. You see this strategy that's used a lot when companies announce, hey, you can use our patents for free. Like Toyota did that when they were working on their hydrogen vehicles. So they opened up their patent portfolio and allowed companies to license it for no money up front. Basically, they wanted them to just work on evolving the technology and maturing the market. Tesla did the same thing with its electric vehicle patents. Sometimes there's greater value in allowing others to work on it. Again, if you offer it into open source, it doesn't mean that you're losing control of it and can't use it. It just means you're allowing others to build upon it. And the more they build upon it, the more valuable, and it opens up new market opportunities for your underlying product or service or technology or whatever the case is. And then licensing switchback, a strategy not well understood by a lot of people, but what that really means is licensing isn't a one-way street. Licensing doesn't mean that it's either or. Licensing doesn't mean you have to license it and that's it. In fact, licensing is a great strategy to use back and forth. One example is Genentech. When the researchers developed their technology, the insulin technology, they knew nothing about running a biotech and pharmaceutical companies. So what they did is they licensed it out to a pharmaceutical company to help build the market, but also, more importantly, they wanted to gain experience on running a biotech and pharmaceutical company. So they started with a licensing agreement that at some point after a certain period of time, they switched out of it. And they went back to becoming the direct, selling direct, manufacturing, marketing, and selling direct, because they had learned the expertise. They knew how to do it now. They had created a licensing partnership to help them not only build the market, but gain the expertise. Take a look at Windows. Bill Gates, who launched Microsoft, by the way, in a recession back in the mid-70s. He used licensing to develop, build his brand and his company. And what happened is he did a licensing deal with IBM. And through that licensing deal, his software, his brand got out to millions of people without him spending much money at all. Very little money, because it went inside every one of those computers. And at some point, a few years later, 4 or 5 years later, he switched out of that. He discontinued the licensing deal with IBM and went direct, because at that point, Windows was well known in the market. People were upgrading their software, and that's what helped launch him and propel Windows to become, and Microsoft to become the largest computer company in the world, is they used licensing. And again, this is a good case study for when you look at what's going on today. You say, you know, recession, this is tough. How are we ever going to get out in the market? You can use licensing to get the resources that you're challenged to get, especially financially. You can use it by creating a licensing partnership. Use that partnership, evolve the market, and at some point, if you decide you're now at a position to go direct, switch out of it and go direct. Another strategy, one that you need to take a good look at, especially if you do a lot of R&D work, is to license out your R&D. It's a great way to fund your R&D, but more importantly, R&D is a growing area for licensing. And a lot of the reason for that is manufacturing processes, drug delivery platforms, product development know-how, things like that. Once you create that and it works and it's perfected, it's something that has a lot of value to other companies, because as you know, if you've done a lot of R&D or doing a lot of R&D, it can be very expensive, very time consuming, and there's often a lot of blind alleys and failure rates. That's where licensing a proven research platform can be immensely valuable, especially if it's similar to what you're doing and has documented results of being able to successfully reach whatever that development milestone is. So today you have many companies that have developed drug discovery platforms, gene therapies to insulin medicines to cell therapies, you name it. They've developed these discovery platforms which help companies, drug companies and others, with their R&D. So instead of having to set up from scratch and try to figure out the best way to do their R&D, they license out these discovery platforms. Oftentimes they include labs. Some of these companies use this strategy where they even have the labs design, and they license out the platform, the lab design, and they often have a proprietary chemical or ingredient that goes along with that drug R&D, maybe for use in cancer research, things like that. And what happens is by licensing these platforms, they develop their own proprietary pipeline of customers who are using their platforms for drug delivery. This is big business, and it's growing bigger. And now as we go into a challenging economic climate, this is going to be more important, because trying to set up your own drug discovery platform from square one is going to be a very expensive proposition. And a lot of businesses are not going to have the ability to be able to do that. Manufacturing processes, again, another big growing area. If you've created a manufacturing process, whether it's for technology, products, prefab homes, whatever the case is, that's very valuable, because engineering a manufacturing process is very time consuming and costly. And today, if you've created a process that can be applied or used within an industry by multiple companies, that's valuable. In fact, Charles Goodyear, he invented the manufacturing process of vulcanized rubber. He never produced it. He licensed it. That's all he did. He licensed it and enforced his patent rights against those who were using it, without his permission. But the point being is he created a process for vulcanized rubber and used licensing to get it into the market. And eventually, one company eventually decided to adopt his name. That's where Goodyear Tire came from, but it wasn't him. He wasn't the one who created that business. He used licensing to get the vulcanized rubber process system into the market and allow other rubber manufacturers to use it to make tires and other things. Technology components. Once you figure out how to build a component, okay, that's very valuable information, because again, it goes back to, you create a component, whether it's for computers, whether it's for bioscans, whether it's for whatever. If it's successful and you've created a way to make that, a way to build those components, that's valuable R&D. And if you're using your component in your product, but you've got that R&D ready to go, and it's scalable and it's something somebody else can use, you can license that out and make money. Again, when you have something that allows others to speed up, because see, the value is it allows them to speed up their R&D. It allows them to minimize the failure rate and lower their costs. That's why it's valuable. The same thing with development know-how, whether it's product development, I talked about drug development, AI development, whatever it is. If you've got development know-how, how to develop something, it's very valuable. And by the way, when I talk about know-how, it's also things that don't work. That's incredibly valuable, because R&D in particular is about going through and figuring out what works and what doesn't work. And today, as trade secrets and know-how have evolved, R&D processes, R&D platforms are becoming incredibly valuable, because companies and businesses and startups don't have the time and the resources to start all over again, to develop their own R&D. So the demand for this type of IP is growing. And if this is a part of your business, if you've been doing a lot of development, then you need to take a hard look at it and say, is our development process, is our manufacturing process scalable? Is it something that we can package up and license others to use? If it is, you've got a valuable IP and a great licensing opportunity for your business. And finally, in wrapping up these strategies, the important point that I want to talk about here is funding, because obviously in this market, funding is a big deal. And with intellectual property and licensing, you do have funding options. In fact, as I mentioned earlier on about the fact that IP is resilient, that there's more interest in IP, that there's more investment in IP, that holds true with funding options for IP. In fact, the last recession, a lot more what's called alternative funding, or looking at IP as a fundable asset, had occurred and will occur. And there's quite a few options for funding IP. Most of these are just virtually unknown. And the IP funding industry was actually born in '97. It's credited to David Bowie. They call it the Bowie bonds. And at that time, he packaged up his 25 of his top albums, put them into a special purpose vehicle, and raised $55 million secured by the copyright song royalties from those albums. And so what happened is the bondholders were paid back through the ongoing royalties generated every time the song was played. In fact, Thomas Edison used his patents to finance his business, finance GE. You see movie studios use IP funding. Healthcare companies use IP funding. It's growing more and more. It's still in its infancy, but it's not well known. So there's a number of ways that IP funding works. This is its own workshop in itself, but I'll take you through some of the most common, and I'll comment on them for you so you understand what they are and how they work. Royalty securitization is probably one of the most common. That's basically a licensing deal that you have in place that's paying royalties. And what you can do is you can sell off or offer to investors all or part of that royalty stream. And that's put into, a special purpose vehicle. And what happens is you receive money today from the investors in return for paying them through the royalties from that licensing deal. And those royalties go in and pay out the investors, and they continue to collect those royalties for a set period of time, and then plus a return. And then after that term has met, or after that return has been met, then the royalties go back to your company in total. Royalty securitization has been growing. There's many firms out there that are looking for good licensing deals with quality licensing partners, especially firms like pension funds and insurance companies that are looking for better returns on their annuities, annuity returns. Licensing contracts offer that type of annuity payment, meaning it's a predictable recurring revenue at a certain rate. So if you do licensing, especially if it's with a top tier company that's well known, and you're looking for a way to raise capital, you can use that licensing deal to do so. The second form is IP investment funds. There's many funds out there today that invest strictly in companies that have IP and are using the licensing model to commercialize them. And the reason they look for those companies is because they see licensing as an exit strategy, meaning they know that by investing in the company, enabling them to get to the point where they can license the technology, moving it into the market through a licensing deal, they have an exit strategy. Because if that IP performs well, partnership expands, the company grows with that IP, they're going to want to acquire it, and that's going to be the exit. So these IP investment funds have been growing, and I suspect now as we move into this economy, you'll see more and more of these IP investment funds, as you will see IP development funding. Again, as the title implies, it is for development of IP. There's many funds, both private and government, that are specifically for IP development. They're looking for companies that have IP, and they invest the money not in the company, but in the development aspect of the IP. There's a difference. So you have to understand they're not investing in the company, they're investing in development. Again, that's packaged up under a special purpose vehicle in which the money goes in and is used for development expenses. There's commercial finance. That's where you go out and use your IP to secure a loan. And that's been happening more and more. It's been mostly with what are called alternative finance companies, companies that aren't conventional banks, but you're seeing more and more conventional finance sources from banks coming into the fold, especially up in Silicon Valley. A number of banks have been using patents as collateral for loans, and there's quite a number of deals that have been put together where IP is used as collateral, and IP is also combined, by the way, with tangible assets like real estate to help secure the loan. Then there's a sale and leaseback. This is a pretty sophisticated strategy. This involves actually selling your IP and then leasing it back in the form of a license to be able to use your IP. By selling it, you obviously get cash in, and by licensing it back, it allows you to use it and profit from it. It's used with a lot of high tech. It's used with a lot of biotech. And it just depends on the type of IP you have and the company that you're working with. Sometimes companies do this because they want to get the acquisition of that IP and allow you to continue working with it and benefit from the royalties. So it's another way of getting funding for your IP. Patent syndication, something that's been around, not well known. That's basically where you have a patent and you syndicate investment into that patent. Oftentimes it's used to get funding to complete the patent application. Many times it's used to complete the patent development, but it's syndicating to, it's like, it's an investment syndication, except you're using the patent and you're syndicating a portion of that patent, the returns on that patent, to the investors. So they're essentially investing in your patent, in your technology, in the underlying technology, and it's secured by that patent. And then finally, a new form, because IP funding is evolving as they recognize it as an asset. There's a new type of funding that's coming into the market. It's still unknown and it's new. It's called initial licensing offer. And basically what this enables you to do is to take your IP and you can offer it to investors. You can offer a license to investors, enabling them to participate in royalties on your IP once it's commercialized. Now, it's brand new, and the idea here is that investors who like your company and your IP will get a license from you. In return, you'll agree to pay them a royalty. Now, as part of this, the initial licensing offer, the investors also agree to help promote your product or technology or brand. The idea here is not only do they receive a royalty, but in return, they help to build your awareness, to help get your product into the market. It's an interesting application of funding. As I said, it's brand new, but it's out there and it's growing, and I suspect you'll see more of theirs. There's also royalty exchanges for music royalty, where musicians can put their music online and receive cash in return for paying some of their music royalties back to the investors. So these things are there, they're evolving. And again, as we go into this economic challenging climate, these IP funding options, I think, will grow, and you'll see more of them because, again, it's the innovation that's going to move us forward and get us through this challenge, and then, of course, into an upswing and profitable time. So let me just summarize the key points for you here. Just remember, IP is a resilient asset, as I told you. It can move, it's flexible, you could use it. It's inside your business. The most important thing you can do is an audit right now. Find out what you've got. Remember, you've got types of IP, and inside those different types are all your assets. Once you figure out what they are, you can use licensing to put them to work for your business. And you've got the time now. So my recommendation, as I said, is understand what you've got, and then you can figure out which of these licensing strategies. And as I said, remember, they cross over. They're not necessarily distinct. Many of them cross over and can be used in many different ways. They're not mutually exclusive from one another. That's the beauty of licensing, is to understand it can be used many ways, and often is, and is a way in which you can keep your business going forward, keep building value, and ultimately be able to survive through this and move on into the upswing. Now, let me just give you a few concluding remarks. And one of the most important things to understand is that one IP can change the world and has changed the world. You know, as I said earlier, these economic tumultuous times have come and gone. And there's been changes in governments, there's been changes in economies, but the one thing that has remained consistent has been innovation and intellectual property. And especially as we've progressed forward in the last 30 years, IP has continued to catapult our economy forward and economies of the world forward, and it will continue to do the same thing. And it literally does take one IP to change the world. Back in the 1769, the patent that changed the world was for the steam engine, which ushered in a whole new era and just shot the living standard sky high. And then, of course, by the 1980s, when Windows was introduced and operating systems, and then, of course, the 90s with the World Wide Web. So as we're in 2020 and moving forward, okay, as I said, remember, it's a global intellectual property world. It's a global licensing world. There's so much innovative technology out there, and the opportunity exists for all of you here to look at your intellectual property and to be able to use it to reach out to the global community through licensing, to form partnerships, and to take that innovation and start generating revenues, expanding your market, building your market share, creating new opportunities. And it doesn't have to require money. It just requires understanding what you've got and how you can use it strategically through licensing in a global marketplace. So let me close with this quote from Seth Godin, which I think wraps it all up. Basically, we are in an evolving economy. Every economic turmoil means that the economy is evolving and it's going to move to a new configuration, a new paradigm. So what Seth had said is that the first 100 years of the country were focused on efficient farms. The second 100 years were about efficient factory. And the third 100 years are about ideas. And we're now into that idea stage. We're now into that period where innovation, ideas, innovation come from ideas. Ideas are innovation. Innovation becomes intellectual property. Intellectual property becomes products, services, and technology. So we're in that period where now we're in a new economy where innovation is going to be the dominant player. And you have the opportunity to use your intellectual property and your innovation in a global marketplace to not only survive in this economy, but to thrive and to really be in position to take advantage of the upswing in the economy when it comes, because it will come. No matter how long this lasts, those that are working with their IP, those that understand it, will have the ability to continue developing relationships, continue to position their businesses, and continue to prosper through this economic challenge. So some more information for you. If you haven't visited my website, there it is up there. You can find information, special reports, videos, blog posts, you name it. I've got two websites, licensingcg.com, more the strategy side of intellectual property and licensing for profits, which is a great site to go to if you want to learn the nuts and bolts, the how-to, all the different steps in the licensing process. A lot of great free information there. There's some training courses, e-courses, workshops, you name it. A lot of great resources. I highly encourage you to go there, sign up for the newsletters. It's going to help continue your education process and help you identify what your licensing opportunities are. So with that, I'd like to open it up to any questions that you might have, and I thank you for your participation and your time here today. I hope you found this workshop valuable, and I hope you found some good ideas, and I hope you're going to be able to use them, put them to good use, and develop the next big IP to change the world. Thank you so much. Hope you enjoyed this workshop. I hope you got a lot out of it, a lot of good ideas on how you can use your IP and licensing to really survive and thrive through the challenging economy ahead of us all. If you have any questions or you'd like to find out more about my consulting services and how I can help you with your IP in using it and implementing some of the strategies that we covered here today, please reach out, give me a call, send me an email. My contact information is there on the screen. Be happy to have a conversation with you to explore options and opportunities that you have with your intellectual property and ways you can use it to expand your business, develop, pivot your business, whatever the case may be. If you've got IP, you can use it to keep your business going and thriving in the upswing to come. Again, thanks for joining me, and stay healthy, and I look forward to seeing you again in another workshop or working with you directly in helping you to create a successful business in challenging times. Thanks again. Bye-bye.